Um, it's a pleasure to be here today. I'm going to. I love presenting about this topic because it means a lot to me. Of course, like you have heard, the first week I was talking about Wales, so I know a few Welsh words. I think some people say boulder, some people say boldwa, some people say ptuity, depending on the time. So if I am wrong and I don't get it right, forgive me about that. And of course, some people who are French could say ça va, bonjour. Of course, the German people will say Guten Morgen, Guten Tag. So depending on where you fall, so that means the world is so global. The topic I'm talking about today, let's go. It affects people across the world, and then I'm talking about something which probably in one way or another may have affected someone you know or someone you don't know. It's something which actually looks at armed conflict. But of course, I'm trying to discuss the fact that here you always find that wherever you have wars, the earlier speaker, someone who talked about here, said he would like to live in a world without wars. So you are looking at a scenario where I see if there is a war, a lot tends to run out of hand. You see a little girl there, and probably she will be struggling to have food. She will be struggling to have maybe water, housing. But again, more to that, you find that many times where there is armed conflict, people who are disabled could really struggle more than people who have legs. You manage to walk in today. But someone who doesn't have legs, who uses clutch sticks, they will struggle to walk into this room. But at the same time, maybe many times we fail to understand how this affects the bigger population. And what you are saying there is simply kind of a layout of how people think about war in a way simply as a destroying factor, but it actually makes some people lose their legs. The next photograph there is actually simply showing someone who is struggling, and they are simply making things which are like prostheses, which are used to enable them walk. And some of these scenarios may find that some people may have, you wake up and then you are able to walk, and tomorrow you're not able to walk. So people have, I don't know how many of you have lived in a war-torn zone or in an armed conflict area, or in an area which has a war, which has been destroyed or devastated by armed conflict. So this is something which also affects military men who go in war-torn areas and they are carrying out work. But actually it also affects little kids, young kids, as long as they are born in war-torn areas or war or areas of the armed conflict. But of course, what is very interesting is that, they struggle with mobility. That's not enough. If you give this little kid a clutch stick to walk, it may not help them much because they won't be able to run around and play with the rest in a circle. They won't be able to integrate easily with the rest of the little kids, and that's something which will affect them for generational years. So it's very interesting to see how this is something which repeatedly it may be interesting to think about in a broader structure. But of course, like I've said, the earlier photographs you may have seen may have been taken in the Middle East. But some other photographs were taken in Africa. So that shows wherever there is an armed conflict, regardless of where it's happening, people will be affected. Some people will lose their legs. But of course, it has a gender-based inclination attached to it. Because if someone is a woman, they may struggle in certain ways. They may not be able to probably do certain things which other women without disabilities are able to do. So there is a gender sort of inclination to that. But of course, whenever there is a war, a lot of things have to be done in light of enabling them to gain their mobility and their ability to move. And of course, prosthesis is one of the things which are very common, which have high demand in areas which are undergoing post-conflict rehabilitation. Of course, as to whether someone will be able to do their job, to do their daily activities, to be involved in day-to-day activities with a prosthesis, that's yet another thing, which I wouldn't like to talk about today. But it's very interesting how you can see that the ability to participate in public life, in day-to-day activities, is often affected. And of course, it may depend whether someone is 35 years or 45 years or someone is a little kid of 3 years. So the effect may vary depending whether you are in your childhood or you are in your adulthood. And of course, more to that is that, today it may be interesting, some of you may know, some others may not, that anti-personnel missiles are one of the means and methods of warfare used. So if there is an armed conflict, you may find that that pictures there is simply showing anti-personnel missiles. So certain countries are increasingly trying to say, well, this is not the right means and methods of warfare to use today. But of course, what is also very interesting is that during armed conflict, there is evacuation and people have to leave, or they have to leave as fast as possible. So there is a possibility that some people with armed conflict, with disabilities, could be left behind. So their mobility is often a big problem. And in terms of enabling them to leave, that's another issue, which is increasingly crucial in people who are living in in such areas. So it's something you may have to think about in light of course, what we may realize that they become more vulnerable because of their disability. In such an environment, they are more vulnerable than people without disabilities. So you find that if they are probably refugees and they end up in another country, it's at times very hard to think about their needs because their needs are quite unique. But of course, what is also very common where you have displacement is that people won't live in normal houses. People will live in camps, what they call camps for internally displaced persons. And of course, most of this work is done by United Nations. Some of it is done by World Health Organizations. These institutions try to do their best to give them housing, give them shelter, give them accommodation. But of course, like I've said before, one of the common problems will be depression, or what they call post-traumatic stress with people who are in armed conflict areas. So you may find someone is struggling and they're trying to cope, but it's often not very easy. But of course, what you'll also find that kids with disabilities or little children will be more vulnerable and maybe women in some of these zones where you have problems of armed conflict. So this is something which is increasingly interesting in light of a situation where you have armed conflict as a contemporary problem today across the global spectrum. Thank you very much for your attention.